10 players with major question marks heading into week 7. Can we trust them? Hey, before I get to those players, if you haven't tried Underdog Fantasy yet, now is a great time because they have a ton of great stuff for new customers. Number one, they're giving every new customer a 100% deposit bonus up to $500. That means any amount you deposit for the first time up to $500, they are going to match it. And you can take that money and use it right away. That is free money from Underdog Fantasy. But number two, they're also going to give you this great Lamar Jackson new customer special on Sunday. All he has to do is go higher than half a yard. You pair that with any other line on Underdog, and you can triple your entry right away your first time playing. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com, use promo code ENDGAME, get access to that deposit bonus, take the money they give you, put it on the Lamar Jackson new customer special, and triple your entry just like that. Let's start with Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the biggest disappointments in fantasy this year. This guy was drafted in the 3rd, 4th round in most leagues. And look, has been one of the biggest disappointments in real life football too. Let's not forget the Lions drafted this guy with their first pick in the 1st round at pick number 12, and he's been a change of pace back, which has been both bad for real life and fantasy. Look, he will get a chance here over the next couple of weeks with David Montgomery out, but are we really sure we're going to see significantly more Jahmyr Gibbs going forward these 2 weeks? Or are we just going to see Craig Reynolds or whoever as the lead here? Who knows? But the real worry here long term is that we know David Montgomery is probably going to be back after the team's bye, which means he's back in week 10. And we know this staff and Dan Campbell loves David Montgomery. And look, he's a good runner. He's great for this system. So for Jahmyr Gibbs, it's hard to see him ever paying off his 3rd or 4th round ADP this year. I got to say Jahmyr Gibbs looking like a bust. And then another 3rd round running back who is really disappointed has been Ramondre Stevenson. And no, it's not because they went out and signed Ezekiel Elliott. He's been horrible. It's just because this offense has been horrible, horrific, doing nothing. One of the worst offenses. That's not even fair. The worst offense in the NFL, maybe the worst defense in the NFL right now, one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the NFL right now. But look, there were signs of life in week 6 against the Raiders. Now, granted, it was a great matchup, but what I really liked was not necessarily that Ramondre Stevenson had a nice game. But I mean, that's good, of course. But what I really liked was this team actually used motion a lot in this game. Like, they weren't this stagnant, snap the ball and get sacked type of offense. They actually looked like a modern day offense using motion, making it harder on the defense, and that opened up the running lanes. So hopefully that will continue going forward, but still it's hard to see Ramondre Stevenson ever paying off that 3rd round ADP this year in this offense unless something really drastic changes. And I don't even know what drastic could change at this point, to be honest. So Ramondre Stevenson, I still think he'll be okay rest of the season. I think he'll be solid. But based on where you drafted him, probably going to be a bust. And then easily the biggest surprise of the 2023 season has been Adam Thielen. Not only that he's actually been good, he's a top 3 PPR wide receiver right now. Like, what is happening? 33-year-old Adam Thielen, top 3 wide receiver. Will that continue? I mean, look, probably not. There's not been a lot of 33-year-old wide receivers to put up a top 3 seasons. And the ones who have, we're talking about like Jerry Rice, some of the greatest wide receivers to ever play the game. And there are also all worries here as the team went into the bye this week. They announced that the offensive coordinator would now be taking over play calling from Frank Reich. So we could see a different offense. We don't know what we're going to see coming out of the bye. But look, Adam Thielen is pretty much the best receiver they have here. He's got very little competition. And they're going to be in a lot of games where they're getting blown out because the defense is terrible. So if you're banking on Adam Thielen being a top 3 wide receiver rest of the season, it's probably a little much. But I think Adam Thielen can at least be a top 20 wide receiver rest of the season. And considering that you drafted him outside the top 100 or maybe didn't draft him at all, that's a trust. All right, let's go from the old to the new, and let's talk about Puka Nacua. The breakout rookie for the Los Angeles Rams was fantastic in those first games without Cooper Kupp, and then has been okay with Cooper Kupp back. Had one great game, one terrible game. But look, he's still heavily involved in this offense. He still had a very high target share last week. Even though they didn't throw it a lot, his target share was over 30%. He still has a decent first read target share, which is important. And this is a team that's probably going to throw the ball a lot most weeks. They're not going to have games like last week where they're hardly throwing it. I certainly think there is enough here for Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Look, Cooper Kupp is going to be an absolute monster rest of the season, and that is going to make Puka more volatile. You're going to have weeks like last week where if he doesn't score a touchdown, he gives you very little. But you're also going to have weeks like the week before where he can be very good. So considering he was a waiver wire pickup pretty much in 100% of leagues, and I still think he's going to be a solid wide receiver 2 rest of the season, Puka Nacua, definitely a trust. And then another running back that's really disappointed this year, especially where he was being drafted, is Tony Pollard, who was picked in the second round in most leagues. And look, fantasy points wise, he's been pretty solid, but he hasn't been putting up great numbers, hasn't been putting up those huge games like we have wanted so far. Not really what you wanted out of your second round running back, who was probably your RB1, the first running back you drafted. But I do like Tony Pollard going forward. He's getting crazy elite usage. He's getting work around the goal line, work in the red zone. And what I really love is he's catching passes. We saw that on Monday night. He was doing nothing, then bam, 60-yard catch, and suddenly he's having a monster fantasy game. And you combine that with the fact that the Cowboys' schedule here, at least in the short term, gets very good for running backs. I think we see Tony Pollard start to get it going here. I still think he'll come through for your fantasy teams. Don't give up on Tony Pollard. I'm trusting him. Let's go back to another, fairly young wide receiver. Michael Pittman has been a great value where you drafted him this year. He's had a ton of nice games with Anthony Richardson, even had a couple good games with Gardner Minshew. But we've got to be a little concerned going forward because we know, number one, it's going to be Gardner Minshew rest of the season. And number two, there are rumors that they may be trying to trade for Jerry Jeudy. I don't know about that. I don't even know if Jerry Jeudy would necessarily make me nervous. But I think what does make me nervous is Gardner Minshew. Sure, he had a nice game last week, but that's because Gardner Minshew threw the ball 50-something times. But in games where they don't need to throw it that much, when they're not getting just smoked because Gardner Minshew is turning the ball over multiple times and then giving up all these points, Michael Pittman's ceiling is probably going to be much lower now. So he went from a guy that I really liked, a guy I thought had a high floor with a decent ceiling, to now a guy that probably still has a high floor, but not so much of the ceiling. But again, this was a guy you drafted very late in your drafts. If you look at him rest of the season as more like a wide receiver 3 going forward, I think that's fine based on where you drafted him. So for that reason, I'm going to say trust. Now back to another young running back, Breece Hall. Is he starting to come on? He's really shown signs the last couple of weeks. And what I really like for Breece Hall isn't necessarily the fantasy games. I mean, look, yeah, he had that big run against Denver. Okay, that's to be expected. He scored that touchdown against the Eagles. Look, that was one of the flukiest touchdowns you'll ever see because A, it took Jalen Hurts throwing a late game interception to even give them a chance to score, and B, the Eagles let him walk into the end zone so they could get the ball right back and go try to win the game. But what I really like here for Breece Hall is the usage. The last 2 weeks, he is clearly the number one running back here. Dalvin Cook barely involved. Michael Carter barely involved. And he's getting involved in the passing game. We know that's a big part of his game. He needs those pass catches. Will we see 100% Breece Hall this year? Probably not. Does it matter? Probably not either, because if you can get to like 80, 90%, that will probably be good enough. They have a good schedule rest of the season. The only worries here is can this offense and this offensive line support him? But he's a good enough player. He's getting the usage. I think Breece Hall rest of the season is a trust. Then one of the most polarizing players, even before the fantasy season started and now even through 6 weeks, is Calvin Ridley. This guy every week, it's like, what are you going to get with Calvin Ridley? Is he a stud? Is he still elite? Is he the number one? Is he the number two? This was another guy who started to creep up second round of drafts, third rounds of drafts. This was a guy most people were counting on as like either a low-end wide receiver 1 or a high-end wide receiver 2. And yeah, he's delivered a few times, but he's also been really bad a few times. And I really think that's just what we're going to continue to see here. I don't have a good feeling that we're going to see a week in, week out Calvin Ridley who you can just set and forget and feel really good about, because Christian Kirk is still a very good wide receiver. Evan Ingram is a good tight end. Oh, and guess what? Their running game this year is great with Travis Etienne, and he's catching passes. So will Calvin Ridley pay off that second, third round ADP? Probably not. Another wide receiver who people are really starting to give up on right now is Devonta Smith. After a nice start to the season, he's taken a huge backseat to A.J. Brown, who's been an absolute monster the last 4 games. But look, Devonta Smith is a very talented wide receiver. We know this. He's in a great offense with a great quarterback in Jalen Hurts. We know Devonta Smith is going to have some big games going forward. He just has to. He had 11 targets in that week 6 game. He just had a couple bad drops and just didn't come through. So Devonta Smith, definitely not a player I'm willing to give up on. He's a guy you drafted as a wide receiver too. I think that's right where he should be. Better days certainly ahead for Devonta Smith. He's too talented. The offense is too talented. He's definitely a trust for me. And then finally, maybe the biggest bust at wide receiver this year has been T. Higgins. Has had one good game, a bunch of bad games, missed games with injury. I mean, it's been a mess if you drafted T. Higgins. He has killed your team many weeks this season. But you got to feel good about him going forward, or at least I got to feel good about him going forward. Look, they're on the bye this week. He's going to be healthier. They're going to come out of that bye. You got to think they're going to right this ship. They're going to get it going. This offense is loaded with talent. It's going to have to get better. There's just too much talent here. T. Higgins also just way too talented to be this bad rest of the season. T. Higgins, a great buy low right now, but also a guy I definitely am going to trust rest of the season. So there's my take on 10 players, but if you want to know our take on who you should start, who you should sit, who could boom, players you should grab now before they break out in week 7, check out our week 7 playlist right here.